It was as bad a worship service as I have ever been a part of or ever hope to be a part of again. In time, I came to call it Nuclear Sunday because that congregation almost melted down. Our implosion began just before the benediction when an announcement was read that a beloved staff member had resigned. That beloved staff member was sitting in the back row, surrounded by friends and family, and at the reading of the announcement stood up and said, "I most certainly did not resign." Pandemonium. The senior pastor just sat frozen. I was not the senior pastor. Thanks be to God. I was the associate pastor, and the bishop had not yet said to me, "Take thou authority." Thanks be to God. I was exactly a year and a month out of seminary and had no clue exactly what was next or what I should do. People stood up and they spoke, and in a few minutes, the senior pastor, the lay leader, and the beloved but recently dismissed staff member all went out in the hall, presumably to pray or do something. I don't know. I sat there wondering what to do. Should I dismiss the congregation? Should I lead a prayer? Should I call for a hymn? I had no clue, and I was not wanting to overstep my role. Finally, the three returned, and they said nothing. Nothing. They didn't offer any words to us. And so I gave the benediction and wished I had done it 15 minutes earlier. And then I stood by the back door and then out in the parking lot for the next 90 minutes offering pastoral care to our congregation. When I came back inside, the senior pastor was lying down on the front pew, and I spent 20 minutes giving pastoral care to my senior pastor. Just the day before, Connie and I had been frolicking in the Atlantic Ocean, and she was still at the beach, and I might still be a little bitter that I was not there with you even today. I came home to what felt like the emptiest of houses. I was angry, confused, and adrift. But before I could pull off my tie, my phone rang, and my friend John blurted out, "Hey, a bunch of us are going to the lake. Why don't you come with us?" I begged off and offered some made-up excuses. And John pressed in, and he said, "There's nothing you're going to do this afternoon that's going to help our church. It's going to be a long, hard slog. Come to the lake and have some fun." Well, that was a convincing argument, but I still begged off. And then, I won't suggest this as therapy, but I grabbed a bag of chips and flipped on the television. A few minutes later, my phone rang again, and it was John, and he was laughing. He said, "I'm pulling into your driveway. Get your swimsuit and come to the lake." And when I got my swimsuit and walked out to his SUV, there were a bunch of friends from the church, a group of folks that I ran with 3 days a week. Literally, we ran 3 to 4 miles, 3 days a week. They were all there. And in a few minutes, we were slinging each other around on the inner tube. And when the lake got glassy, we did a little skiing. And finally, as the sun faded, we pulled out into the middle of the lake and watched the clouds change and ate a delicious dinner that came from Minute Mart, like peanut butter, Oreos, and grapes. I remember the grapes. All day long, those friends had given me the gift of not talking about Nuclear Sunday's worship. But as we broke bread, each of us confessed not knowing what to do for the church that we all loved. And strangely, somehow, as I bobbed out, sitting on a life jacket, eating grapes, I felt hope for the first time that day. It's been over 25 years. But as I pondered our baptismal vows kind of coincide nicely with the lectionary text, and we're going to be looking at both of those, our baptismal vows, and some lectionary passages in the next couple of weeks. The vow to surround one another with a community of love and forgiveness. As I thought about that day when my friends pulled into my driveway and pulled me back into community. Over the next year, when I thought seriously about giving up, giving in to bitterness, or just simply moving away, I was recentered by that holy time, bobbing in the water, just treading water with my friends. That moment reminded me of all the things that were good around me, and I'm not talking about the lake. I was reminded that I was not alone, that the church was better than its worst moments, and I was loved by loving and forgiving people who mostly tried to love each other. One of my favorite parts of all our baptismal vows is this part where the celebrant asks the congregation, will you nurture one another in the Christian faith and life and include these persons before you in your care? And God's people, we say back together, with God's help, we will proclaim the good news and live according to the example of Christ. We will surround one another with a community of love and forgiveness so that we may grow in service to God. We will pray for each other so that each of us might live as true disciples walking in the way that leads to life. It is hard to overestimate how foundational that vow is to living as a Christian person in the world. You know, any day you can read a news clip about church members missing the mark, can't you? To surround one another with a community of love and forgiveness. The schism that's infecting the United Methodist Church offers a steady stream of name-calling instead of nurturing, shunning instead of surrounding with love, and conflict instead of community. We're like a once-married couple that can't remember one thing that we used to love about our former partner. But that's not who God invites us to be. This Wednesday night, Paul Franklin, 6 o'clock in room 124. That's a mini commercial. Paul Franklin will lead a discussion of Bishop Carter's book, Unrelenting Grace, a United Methodist Way of Life. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Unrelenting Grace, a United Methodist Way of Life. You know, sadly, the larger American Christian culture may be even more focused on division and divisiveness than our divided United Methodist Church. But yet, where else can we go to find a community that seeks to be grounded in love and dedicated to forgiveness of one another? I would say there's not too many places like that. The prophet Isaiah looks at the church and sees a lot of room for improvement. Act justly. Do what is righteous. Keep the Sabbath. Avoid evil. Don't let the immigrant feel excluded from God's people. Don't let the eunuch say, I am a dry tree. The Lord says to the eunuchs who keep the Sabbath, I will give you a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will bring the immigrants and those that Leviticus bars from serving in the holy church. I will bring them into my holy church and fill them with joy as they pray. And my house will be known as a house of prayer for all people. That's not just a slogan. It's a way of life. It's their witness out in the community. When you look at these people, you say, they know the love of God and they welcome all people. They are known as a community of love and forgiveness. They are known as a place that all people can come and pray. And then Isaiah says that the Lord is the one who gathers the outcast. Isn't that beautiful? Love casts no one out. Love gathers and nurtures and heals. God who gathers the outcast says, I will gather still others than those I've already gathered. Still others. It's a little further out there. A little more than maybe Isaiah can get into his head. You know, the love of God is wider and deeper and greater than our understanding. Paul tells us that in Ephesians 3. And so Isaiah says, I don't know who all God's going to include, but it's bigger than those God's gathered right now. God's going to gather even more folks in. You know, where do you draw the excluding line on a boundless love? Because love is always drawing in, welcoming, loving, embracing, healing, empowering. The prophet Isaiah says to a church that's lost its way, cry out for justice and live with inclusion. These are foundational values of love, justice and inclusion. Don't let the immigrants say the Lord will exclude me. Don't let the eunuch say I'm just a dry tree. No, God says, I will give you a name better than sons and daughters. I will accept you, and my house will be known as a house of prayer for all people. Because God gathers the outcast, and God will gather still others. You know, it's one thing to be tolerated. You ever been just tolerated? You ever been just included? You ever been the last kid picked in kickball, you know? I guess we got to take Purdue. He's the last one standing there. You ever had that burn? You ever felt that? Love delights. Love delights in others. Love sees their belovedness. Love gives them names better than sons and daughters. Love invites them to celebrate their belovedness. Isaiah envisions the kind of community that we seek to build that surrounds people with love and forgiveness. And Isaiah reminds us that God might be doing more than we ever imagined. God will gather still others. Because that is the nature of love, isn't it? To gather and to pull close. In Mark's telling of Jesus flipping over the temple, Jesus quotes Isaiah. Hasn't it been written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? Do we have that vision? that beautiful vision of all people feeling welcomed and loved, that all people can come and pray? Do we have a vision of Christ whose love is big enough to hold all people? Immigrants, eunuchs, outcasts, theological opponents. You know, John Wesley, he one-ups Jesus a little bit, or he raises the stakes. Jesus says, love your enemies. John Wesley said, love even the enemies of God. Love even the enemies of God. Do we have a vision of God's love that's big enough to include you and me and all people? Do we understand how foundational and how radical that vow is to surround one another with a community of love and forgiveness? In Acts 8, we encounter this beautifully educated Ethiopian royal riding in a Lamborghini chariot. That's a loose translation. And you know, when Philip is asked a question, he doesn't lean into the Levitical law. He leans in the poetry and prophetic vision of Isaiah. Don't let the eunuch feel left out, cut off. And you hear in this assistant secretary to Queen Candace, you hear in this ambassador the trepidation, Maybe they're fearing they'll be excluded just one more time. It's probably happened a lot. And so the Ethiopian official says, what would keep me from being baptized? Do you hear the negative in that? Not can I be baptized, when can I be baptized? What would keep me from being baptized? And Philip, maybe a wiser preacher than me, doesn't say anything. He just goes down to the water and baptizes the person. Gives them the name as better than son or daughter. Because God gathers all people. Because that's what love does. And even though the eunuch never sees Philip again, they go on their way rejoicing. How might our worlds and the world be different if we leaned into Jesus' call to love our neighbor as ourselves? What if we dedicated to surrounding everyone with a community of love and forgiveness? And yeah, we'll need forgiveness, and forgiveness doesn't mean no accountability, but we need forgiveness because our love will fail, won't it? We will blow it. We will be selfish sometimes. But what could be a better goal for our life than to surround ourselves and surround those around us with love and forgiveness? What could be a better goal for our church? What could be a better aspiration for our community? What could be a better gift to our family or our family? What could be better than surrounding one another with a community of love and forgiveness? You know, as a postscript, I called my friend John and shared my nuclear Sunday story. I wanted to see if it's okay after 25 years, to tell this story. I don't think I've ever told it before, at least not to a big group. It's funny, John couldn't remember exactly taking me out on the lake. I think that's beautiful, really. Because, we never know what our little acts of pulling in somebody's driveway, sending a card, sending an encouraging word, sticking with people, inviting people into community, and not giving up on them. We don't have any idea what difference that may make in the world. But it made such a difference to me. And over the next 18 months, I often remembered that Holy Communion with those friends on the lake. You just don't know. You don't know what people might take away from your act of love and forgiveness. So, dear friends, doesn't our world need some surrounding with love? Doesn't need some surrounding with forgiveness? And is not love and is not forgiveness, practicing that, is that not the most renewing, uplifting, and reinvigorating power in the world? For God is ultimately love. And that's not to say there's never accountability. But let us rededicate ourselves to being a community defined by love and striving to live into the forgiveness that God has given so freely to us. Amen.